Hello all, my name is Daisy and today I'm going to explain a poem named The Escape. The author of the poem is Narayan Shyam. Masters and critics of the Sindhi language and literature have a common view about famous Sindhi poet Narayan Shyam that he, the only one after the Shah Sahib, who not only have control on language and expression, but he is the ocean of vocabulary, even in Farsi also. Narayan Shyam was born as the son of Devan Gokuldas and Jamuna Devi Nagwani on 22nd July 1922 at a small village, Kahi Kasim of Taluka Naushahro Firoz of Nawab Shah district in Sindh. He is an exemplary Sindhi poet who pioneered Sindhi poetry and popularized it. He introduced Western forms as well as classical forms like Doha, Ghazal, Bait, and Wai in his poetry. 11 collections of poetry, including Variya Bhario, planned, have been appreciated by the reading public. This poem, The Escape, is a special tribute to the poetic talent which subtly explains the futility and needlessness of enmity and hatred. This is translated from Sindhi by Param Abhichandni. Here we go with the poem. Yes, my foe he was. Where did he come from? He stood by my side, and like this, I gnashed my teeth, bit my lips. So here in this para, the poem is mainly addressing the enemy of the poet. The speaker hates its enemy. One day, the enemy comes and stands behind him. The speaker does not know from where the enemy had come. He looks at him furiously and he gnashes his teeth and bites his lips. And for a moment, with saucy, spearing eyes, into his face I looked and then turned away my face. Move he didn't, however. For a moment, the poet looked at him, looked at his enemy. He was looking at his enemy with spearing eyes in anger. And then, for a moment, he looked at the enemy and then he looks away. Then, but also, the enemy didn't move away, he stood there itself. Peremptorily, there he stood and said to me, one day, when this age of animosity will face away, and when we shall have spent the last bullet, or even if the bullets remain. The enemy didn't move, he stood there itself, and then he said to the speaker, one day the animosity between them would end when they shall have spent the last bullet. Even if they still have some bullets, we shall not load them, for our injured, imbecile hands will not move to pick them. Then we may perhaps ask, what were we fighting for? And we may feel helpless to find any reason therefore. Even though some bullets are left, we would not load those bullets into the gun. For our injured hands, nor we may not make any move to pick them up. When both the poet and his enemy are at peace, they would be able to discuss why they were fighting after all. Then they may not be able to answer that question because there was no reason for their fight between them. That we were hating each other with lapse into a history. He stood in expectation to hear from me, but I escaped. Had I waited there any longer, certainly I would have embraced him. When there is a question asked, Like, why were we fighting for so long? Then they might not find any reason because there was no reason for the fight. Their animosity and hatred would dissolve into peace and would lapse into history. Their fight would only be remembered in the history books. The enemy stood there expecting an answer from the speaker, but the speaker he could not find any reason for the fight to answer the question of the speaker's enemy. So he escaped from there without giving an explanation. Because if the poet would have stood there, he would have certainly hugged the enemy joyfully. Summary of the poem. The poem is all about the enmity and hatredness that the speaker had towards his enemy. When the enemy stood beside him, the speaker grinded his teeth in anger and bit his lips. For a moment, the speaker looked at his enemy with piercing eyes and then turned his face. When the speaker said, "Move," his enemy didn't. Instead, he stood there stubbornly. He said to the speaker that one day this enmity of ours will fade away. They might have spent their last bullet, and even if the bullets remain, their weak, injured hands would not go to pick them. Then they may ask each other, "What are we fighting for?" And then we may feel helpless because we could not find any reason for hating each other for so long. The enemy of the speaker stood there waiting for his reply, but the speaker escaped. If the speaker would have stood there itself, he would have certainly hugged him. Thank you.